when a minimum wage night nurse caught a millionaire CEO stealing organs. She faced the most dangerous decision of her life: stay silent or expose the truth. Maria Santos had worked the night shift at Mercy General Hospital for 8 years, walking the same sterile corridors every evening as the sun disappeared behind the city skyline. At 34, she carried herself with the quiet determination of someone who had learned to make difficult choices look easy. As a single mother of 2, the overnight hours paid a differential that helped cover her daughter's asthma medication and her son's daycare costs. At $18 an hour, every dollar mattered in ways that her colleagues with comfortable day shifts and suburban homes couldn't understand. The decision to work nights hadn't been easy. It meant sleeping during the day while her children were at school, catching a few hours of rest before helping with homework and preparing dinner. It meant missing school plays and parent-teacher conferences, relying on her elderly neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez to watch Elena and Miguel when emergencies arose. But the night shift differential of an extra $3 per hour made the difference between choosing between groceries and utilities and actually having a small buffer for unexpected expenses. That extra money meant Elena could get her inhaler refilled without Maria having to decide whether to skip paying the electric bill. It meant Miguel could occasionally get new shoes when his old ones wore out, instead of wearing hand-me-downs that didn't quite fit. Mercy General's reputation was impeccable throughout the tri-state area. The hospital was consistently ranked among the top medical facilities in the region, boasting state-of-the-art equipment and a staff of renowned specialists. The CEO, Dr. Richard Blackwood, was something of a celebrity in medical circles, a charismatic surgeon turned administrator who appeared regularly on medical panels and morning talk shows. His best-selling books about healthcare innovation had made him wealthy beyond his already substantial hospital salary. His office walls displayed photos with senators, governors, and even a former president. Dr. Blackwood's rise to prominence had been meteoric. Just 15 years earlier, he had been a struggling trauma surgeon at a small county hospital. His transformation into a healthcare mogul had been the subject of multiple business magazine profiles, each one praising his innovative approaches to hospital management and patient care. But Maria had noticed things during her night shifts that didn't quite add up. Small inconsistencies that nagged at her trained nurse's instincts. Patients who were supposed to be recovering from routine surgeries sometimes disappeared from their rooms between her 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. rounds. When she asked about transfers, she was told they had been moved to specialized care facilities with names she'd never heard of, despite her years of experience in the medical field. St. Catherine's Extended Care, Riverside Recovery Institute, Metropolitan Rehabilitation Center. These facilities were supposedly taking patients who needed longer recovery periods or specialized treatments. But when Maria tried to look them up online or in medical directories, she found nothing. No websites, no accreditation records, no staff directories. It was as if these places existed only in the transfer paperwork. Just focus on your assigned patients, charge nurse Janet Williams always told her whenever Maria asked questions. Janet had worked at Mercy General for 23 years, climbing from floor nurse to charge nurse to her current position, overseeing the entire night shift. She was a formidable woman in her 50s who ruled the night floors with an iron fist wrapped in professional courtesy. The administration handles patient transfers. Our job is to provide excellent bedside care, not to track patients after they leave our floor. Janet's response always came with a slight edge that made Maria uncomfortable, as if asking about patient welfare was somehow overstepping professional boundaries. but Maria's nursing training had emphasized continuity of care and patient advocacy. How could she provide excellent care if she didn't understand what happened to her patients after they left her floor? On this particular Tuesday night in October, the autumn air carrying the first hint of winter chill through the hospital's climate-controlled environment, Maria was working her usual rounds in the post-surgical wing. The floor was quieter than usual. Only 6 patients recovering from various procedures performed earlier that day. The reduced patient load should have made her job easier, but something felt off about the atmosphere on the floor. At 3:47 a.m., during her routine medication round, Maria approached room 314, where Mrs. Dorothy Patterson was supposed to be recovering from gallbladder surgery. Mrs. Patterson was a 72-year-old retired schoolteacher who had been chatty and optimistic before her surgery, talking about her plans to visit her son in Colorado once she recovered. She had been scheduled for a routine laparoscopic cholecystectomy, a minimally invasive procedure with a typical recovery time of just a few days. But when Maria pushed open the door to room 314, she found it completely empty. The bed was unmade and pushed against the far wall, with no signs that anyone had been there recently. No personal belongings on the nightstand, no flowers from family, no indication that a patient had ever occupied the space. The room looked as if it had been thoroughly cleaned and reset, but there was no note in Maria's assignment folder about Mrs. Patterson being discharged or transferred. Confused and increasingly concerned, Maria checked her assignment sheet again. Mrs. Patterson was definitely listed as her patient in room 314, with medications scheduled for 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. Her surgical notes indicated she had tolerated the procedure well and was expected to be discharged within 48 hours. There was no mention of complications or need for transfer to another facility. Maria walked to the nurse's station and pulled up Mrs. Patterson's electronic medical record on the computer. According to the system, she was still listed as an active patient in room 314, but the room was clearly empty and had been for some time based on the state of the bedding and the absence of any personal items. She decided to check with housekeeping to see if perhaps the patient had been moved temporarily during cleaning. Sometimes patients were relocated to other rooms when deep cleaning or maintenance was required, though such moves were usually noted in the patient management system. Looking around the floor, Maria noticed that room 316, directly across from Mrs. Patterson's assigned room, had its door closed. Room 316 was supposed to be a storage area for medical supplies, linens, basic medications, and backup equipment for the floor. But Maria had never actually seen inside it during her 8 years on the night shift. Supply deliveries always happened during day shift hours, and the night staff was told to contact administration if they needed access to emergency supplies. She walked to room 316 and tried the handle. Locked, but her keycard should provide access to storage areas on her assigned floor. Maria swiped her card, heard the electronic beep of acceptance, and pushed open the door. Instead of shelves lined with medical supplies, Maria found herself looking into what appeared to be a fully equipped operating room that wasn't on any hospital floor plan she'd ever seen. The space was larger than it should have been, extending back much further than the typical hospital room layout would allow. Sophisticated surgical equipment filled the space: monitors, anesthesia machines, surgical lights, and instruments that looked more advanced than what she'd seen in Mercy General's official operating suites. On the operating table in the center of the room lay an unconscious patient, a man who appeared to be in his 30s, with the build of someone who worked with his hands. Maria's nursing experience told her he was under deep anesthesia, connected to monitors that showed stable but artificially maintained vital signs. Standing over him, wearing surgical scrubs and gloves, was Dr. Richard Blackwood himself. But the CEO wasn't performing surgery to save the patient's life. He was systematically and carefully extracting organs with the precision of someone who had performed this procedure many times before. Maria's medical training allowed her to recognize what she was seeing, even as her mind struggled to process it. Dr. Blackwood had made a clean incision along the patient's abdomen and was in the process of carefully removing what appeared to be a kidney. His technique was flawless, his movements confident and practiced. This wasn't the fumbling of someone attempting something beyond their skill level. This was the work of an expert surgeon who had performed this exact procedure countless times. But the patient on the table wasn't brain dead, wasn't a registered organ donor, and wasn't in an authorized transplant surgery. The monitors showed the patient was alive and stable, maintained under anesthesia for what could only be described as surgical murder. Maria's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp as recognition dawned. The patient was Mrs. Patterson's son, Tommy, the young construction worker who had been admitted earlier that week for what was supposed to be routine appendix surgery. She remembered him because he had been so nervous about the procedure, worried about missing work and the cost of the surgery, even with his construction union's insurance. Mrs. Patterson had been staying in a nearby hotel to be close to her son during his recovery. Maria backed away from the door, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain Dr. Blackwood would hear it, even over the hum of the surgical equipment. Her nursing training kicked in, and she found herself automatically cataloguing details even as panic threatened to overwhelm her rational mind. The patient's vital signs on the monitors, the type of anesthesia being used, the surgical instruments, the preservation equipment visible in the corner of the room. Through the small window in the door, she forced herself to continue watching, knowing that what she was witnessing might be the only evidence of this horrific crime. Dr. Blackwood carefully removed the kidney and placed it in a specialized preservation container filled with what appeared to be organ preservation solution. The container was clearly expensive and sophisticated, designed specifically for organ transport. A man in an expensive tailored suit stood nearby, examining the harvested organ with the detached professionalism of someone evaluating merchandise. He was well dressed, probably in his 50s, with the bearing of a successful businessman. Maria had never seen him before, but his presence in this illegal operating room suggested he wasn't a hospital employee. "Quality looks excellent," the man said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to evaluating high-value commodities. "Young, healthy donor, no history of drug use or disease. The buyer will be very pleased with this specimen. That's $75,000 for this kidney, as agreed." "The liver should bring even more," Dr. Blackwood replied, his voice steady and businesslike as he turned back to the unconscious patient. "He's 28 years old, construction worker, no history of alcohol abuse or liver disease, perfect condition. I'm thinking we can get $120,000, maybe $140,000 for the liver, depending on the buyer's urgency." Maria realized with growing horror that she was witnessing not just organ theft, but calculated murder for profit. Tommy Patterson had come in for a simple appendectomy, a routine procedure that thousands of people underwent every year with minimal risk. Instead, he was being systematically harvested for his organs while unconscious. His life ended for the financial gain of the people in this room. The business-like discussion of prices made it clear This wasn't an isolated incident or a crime of opportunity. This was a sophisticated operation with established buyers, set prices, and routine procedures. Dr. Blackwood and his associate were discussing Tommy's organs as if they were evaluating a used car or negotiating the sale of real estate. Maria fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so violently she could barely unlock the screen. She needed to document this, to have proof of what was happening. But she also knew that taking photos or video could expose her presence and put her own life in danger. If Dr. Blackwood was willing to murder patients for their organs, he certainly wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a witness. She managed to activate her phone's camera and began recording through the window, trying to keep her hands steady despite her terror. The video quality wasn't perfect through the small window, but she could clearly capture Dr. Blackwood's face, the patient on the table, and the illegal surgical procedure taking place. The preservation containers visible in the corner of the room suggested this operation was designed to harvest multiple organs from each victim. Maria could see equipment for preserving hearts, livers, kidneys, and other transplantable organs. The setup was sophisticated and expensive, indicating that this criminal enterprise had been operating for some time and generating substantial profits. As she recorded, Maria tried to think about what she should do next. Call 911, contact hospital security, try to save Tommy Patterson's life. Each option carried enormous risks, and she had to consider not just her own safety, but the safety of her children. If she was discovered or killed, Elena and Miguel would be left without their only parent. Dr. Blackwood suddenly stopped his work and looked up, as if sensing he was being watched. His years of surgical experience had probably given him an acute awareness of his environment, an instinct for when something wasn't quite right. Maria ducked below the window level and pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath and praying that her presence hadn't been detected. Her phone was still recording, but she didn't dare lift it back to the window level. She could hear movement and conversation from inside the room, but the words were muffled by the door and her distance from the window. Every second felt like an eternity as she waited to see if Dr. Blackwood would investigate the corridor or continue with his gruesome work. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes, Maria carefully raised her head and peered through the window again. The operating room appeared to be empty except for Tommy Patterson, who now lay motionless on the table with surgical draping covering his body. Dr. Blackwood and his well-dressed associate had vanished, along with the harvested organs and the preservation equipment. The speed with which they had disappeared suggested they had an established protocol for quickly cleaning up and evacuating the space. This wasn't the frantic flight of criminals caught in the act. It was the smooth, practiced withdrawal of people who had planned for various contingencies. Maria tried her keycard on the door, hoping to enter the room and check on Tommy's condition, but the electronic lock no longer accepted her credentials. The access had been changed, probably remotely by someone monitoring the hospital's security system. Her keycard, which had worked just minutes earlier, now produced only a red light and an error beep. Realizing that her presence had likely been detected and that her access to the evidence was now cut off, Maria made the difficult decision to follow proper hospital protocols while protecting herself from immediate danger. She ran to the nearest phone and called security, reporting that she had discovered an unconscious patient in an unauthorized area and requesting immediate medical assistance. "Security, this is Maria Santos on the post-surgical floor," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and professional. "I have a patient emergency in room 316. I found an unconscious patient who appears to need immediate medical attention." "Room 316, the security guard responded. "That's just a storage room, ma'am." "Are you sure about the location?" "I'm positive," Maria insisted. "Please send medical assistance immediately. The patient appears to be post-surgical and may be in distress." When security arrived 15 minutes later, accompanied by a medical team, they found nothing unusual in room 316. The room contained the expected medical supplies and equipment storage, neatly organized on metal shelving units. There was no operating table, no patient, no evidence that any medical procedures had taken place there. "Are you sure you weren't confused about the room number?" Security guard Patterson asked, his tone suggesting he thought Maria might be having some kind of mental health episode. "Room 316 has been storage space for as long as I've worked here. 22 years, and it's always just been supplies." The room had been completely transformed back to its supposed original purpose. The transformation must have taken considerable planning and resources, movable walls, equipment that could be quickly relocated, a system for rapidly converting the space from an operating room back to a storage area. But Maria knew exactly what she had seen, and more importantly, she had video evidence stored on her phone to prove it. The next morning, after her shift ended, Maria sat in her car in the hospital parking lot, exhausted but unable to go home and sleep. The events of the night had left her wired with adrenaline and horror, replaying the scene over and over in her mind. She knew she needed to report what she had witnessed, but she also understood that making accusations against Dr. Blackwood would put her career and possibly her life in jeopardy. She tried to file a report with hospital administration, starting with the patient relations office and working her way up the chain of command. Each person she spoke with became increasingly uncomfortable as she described finding a patient in an unauthorized surgical procedure. "I need to speak with someone about a serious patient safety concern," Maria told the administrative assistant outside Dr. Blackwood's office. "Dr. Blackwood is traveling to a medical conference in Chicago and won't be available for several days," the assistant replied smoothly. "I can schedule you an appointment for next week, or perhaps you'd prefer to speak with the chief of staff." Maria knew that delays were dangerous. If Dr. Blackwood was indeed running an organ trafficking operation, every day that passed meant more potential victims. But she also realized that her accusations would be difficult to prove without additional evidence, and that she needed to build a stronger case before making formal allegations. Instead of waiting for official channels, Maria decided to conduct her own investigation. Using her access to hospital records during her shifts, she began researching the patients who had mysteriously disappeared over the past several months. What she discovered was a disturbing pattern that confirmed her worst fears. The missing patients all fit a specific profile. Young, healthy individuals admitted for routine procedures, who were then transferred to specialized facilities that didn't exist in any medical database she could access. All were between the ages of 18 and 40. All had been admitted for minor surgeries that should have required only brief hospital stays, and all had excellent health histories with no chronic conditions or lifestyle factors that would compromise their organs. Maria cross-referenced their medical records with obituaries and death certificates, a process that took several days of careful research during her breaks and time off. What she found was even more horrifying than she had initially suspected. These patients had been declared dead within 24 to 48 hours of their surgeries, with causes of death listed as unexpected complications or surgical complications despite best efforts. But the death certificates told a different story. Several patients who had supposedly died from surgical complications were listed as organ donors posthumously. Their organs had been harvested and used for transplants, generating substantial fees for the hospital and, presumably, profits for the people involved in the scheme. The most chilling discovery was the timing. According to the electronic medical records, organs had been harvested from these patients hours before their official time of death. In some cases, the organ harvesting had been completed while the patients were still listed as alive and stable in the hospital's computer system. Maria began creating a detailed spreadsheet of the suspicious cases, documenting names, dates, surgical procedures, supposed causes of death, and organ donation records. The pattern was unmistakable. Dr. Blackwood and his associates were systematically murdering healthy young patients under the guise of routine medical care, then selling their organs to wealthy buyers who could afford to skip transplant waiting lists. Dr. Blackwood returned from his medical conference exactly 1 week after Maria had witnessed the organ harvesting. On her next shift, she received a message from administration requesting her immediate presence in the CEO's office. The timing was clearly not coincidental. Dr. Blackwood's office occupied the entire corner of the hospital's executive floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city skyline. The space was designed to intimidate and impress, filled with expensive furniture, original artwork, and shelves lined with medical journals, awards, and honorary degrees. Photographs on the walls showed Dr. Blackwood with politicians, celebrities, and other prominent figures, creating an impression of power and influence that extended far beyond the hospital. "Please sit down, Maria," Dr. Blackwood said, his voice smooth and welcoming, gesturing to one of the leather chairs in front of his massive mahogany desk. "I understand you've been asking questions about patient transfers and showing concern about our protocols." Maria sat carefully, trying to project calm professionalism while her heart raced. She had prepared for this conversation, but being alone in the room with someone she now knew was a murderer was terrifying in ways her nursing training hadn't prepared her for. "I want to remind you that patient confidentiality is paramount at this hospital," Dr. Blackwood continued, his tone still friendly, but carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of warning. "We have protocols and procedures that have been developed over many years to ensure the best possible patient outcomes. Sometimes these protocols require confidentiality agreements and discreet handling of sensitive medical information." "Sir, I believe I witnessed something that may have violated," Maria began, but Dr. Blackwood raised his hand to stop her. "You witnessed nothing," he said, his voice suddenly sharp and final. "And I'd be very careful about spreading rumors or making accusations that could damage this hospital's reputation. We employ over 3,000 people, Maria. We serve this community's medical needs. It would be unfortunate if budget cuts or efficiency measures forced us to eliminate positions, especially in departments where employees have shown unreliability or poor judgment." The threat was clear: speak up and lose her job. More than that, Dr. Blackwood's connections and influence could probably ensure she never worked in healthcare again. A single mother with limited education and job skills, Maria couldn't afford to be blacklisted from the one field where she had experience and training. Dr. Blackwood reached into his desk and withdrew a manila envelope, sliding it across the polished surface toward Maria. "I've been reviewing your performance evaluations, and despite some recent concerns about your judgment, your patient care scores are excellent. You're clearly dedicated to your work and your patients." Maria opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a formal letter offering her a promotion to day shift supervisor, with a salary increase from $18 per hour to $28 per hour. an annual increase of more than $15,000 that would transform her family's financial situation. This promotion would mean regular business hours, better benefits, and the opportunity to advance into hospital administration, Dr. Blackwood explained, his voice returning to its smooth, persuasive tone. Your daughter could get better medical care. Your son could attend a better school. You could buy a house in a safer neighborhood, maybe even take a vacation. Maria stared at the promotion letter, calculating what the salary increase would mean for her family. Elena's asthma medications would no longer be a source of financial stress. Miguel could participate in sports and activities that she currently couldn't afford. They could move out of their cramped apartment into a real house with a yard. But accepting the promotion would mean staying silent about the murders she had witnessed. It would mean becoming complicit in Dr. Blackwood's organ trafficking operation through her silence. That night, Maria sat in her car outside the hospital, unable to start the engine and drive home. The promotion letter lay on her passenger seat, representing everything she had worked toward for 8 years. The salary increase would lift her family out of the constant financial stress that had defined their lives since her divorce. She thought about Elena's last asthma attack, when they had spent 4 hours in the emergency room of a different hospital because she couldn't afford the premium copay at Mercy General. She remembered Miguel asking why he couldn't play Little League Baseball like his friends, and having to explain that they couldn't afford the equipment and registration fees. She thought about their tiny apartment with thin walls and unreliable heating, and how the promotion would allow them to move somewhere safer and more comfortable. But she also thought about Tommy Patterson, who had trusted the hospital with his life during what should have been a routine appendectomy. She imagined his mother Dorothy, probably still waiting for news about her son's recovery, unaware that he had been murdered for his organs. She thought about all the other victims whose names she had researched, young people with families and dreams who had been killed for profit. Maria's phone rang, interrupting her internal struggle. The caller ID showed her neighbor's number, Mrs. Rodriguez, who watched her children when Maria worked late or dealt with emergencies. Maria, you need to come home right away, Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice tight with worry. Elena is having trouble breathing. I gave her the inhaler, but it's not working like usual. I think we need to take her to the hospital. Maria's heart stopped. Elena's asthma had been getting worse lately, despite the medications they could afford. The stress of their financial situation and Maria's long work hours had been taking a toll on both children, and Elena's asthma often worsened during periods of stress. I'm on my way, Maria said, already starting her car. Call 911 if she gets worse. She raced home to find Elena sitting on the couch, struggling to breathe despite multiple doses from her rescue inhaler. Her lips had a bluish tint that Maria recognized as a sign of oxygen deprivation, and her breathing was labored and wheezing. Mama, I can't breathe right, Elena gasped, her voice barely audible. It feels like there's something heavy on my chest. Maria scooped up her daughter and drove to the nearest emergency room, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Elena's asthma had never been this severe before, and the usual medications weren't providing relief. At the emergency room, doctors quickly triaged Elena as a high-priority case. After examining her and reviewing her medical history, the attending physician explained the situation to Maria with the gentle professionalism of someone who delivered difficult news regularly. Elena is having a severe asthma exacerbation that's not responding to standard treatments, Dr. Martinez explained. We need to admit her for intensive treatment and monitoring. The good news is that we can control this with more aggressive medications, but she'll need to stay here for at least 24 to 48 hours. What kind of treatment? Maria asked, holding Elena's hand as her daughter rested under an oxygen mask. Intravenous steroids, continuous nebulizer treatments, and possibly intubation if her breathing doesn't improve, Dr. Martinez replied. The total cost for the treatment and hospitalization will be approximately $8,000. Do you have insurance? Maria's insurance through the hospital would cover about 70% of the cost, leaving her responsible for nearly $2,500. Money she absolutely didn't have. Even with payment plans, the medical bills would be financially devastating for her family. There might be options for charity care or payment plans, Dr. Martinez said sympathetically, but we'll need to keep her here and start treatment regardless. Her condition is serious enough that delay could be dangerous. Sitting in the emergency room, watching her daughter struggle to breathe while calculating how she could possibly pay for the necessary medical treatment, Maria thought about the promotion Dr. Blackwood had offered. With the salary increase, Eleanor's medical crisis wouldn't be a financial catastrophe. They could afford the best possible care without sacrificing other necessities. But accepting the promotion meant staying silent about the organ trafficking operation. It meant allowing Dr. Blackwood to continue murdering patients for profit, while she benefited from his willingness to buy her silence. Elena's breathing stabilized after 6 hours of intensive treatment, but she remained hospitalized for observation and continued nebulizer treatments. Maria sat beside her daughter's bed, watching the rise and fall of her small chest and listening to the steady beep of monitoring equipment. "Mama, are you okay?" Elena asked during one of her more alert moments. "You look worried." "I'm just thinking about some things at work, baby," Maria replied, smoothing her daughter's hair. "You focus on getting better." But Eleanor, despite being only 10 years old, had inherited her mother's perceptive nature. Is it about helping people? You always say your job is to help people who are sick. The simple question cut straight to the heart of Maria's dilemma. Her job was indeed about helping people who were sick, about being an advocate for patients who couldn't advocate for themselves. How could she stay silent about an operation that was murdering the very people she had sworn to protect? That morning, after Elena's condition had improved enough for her to sleep peacefully, Maria made her decision. She kissed her daughter's forehead, left detailed instructions with the nursing staff about Elena's care, and drove downtown to the FBI field office. The federal building was intimidating, with metal detectors and security guards who scrutinized her credentials before allowing her access to the upper floors. Maria had never imagined she would be walking into an FBI office as a whistleblower, but the evidence on her phone and the documentation she had compiled left her no choice. Special Agent Sarah Chen was a woman in her early 40s, with the sharp, analytical gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating complex criminal cases. She listened to Maria's story with growing alarm, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions about dates, locations, and the evidence Maria had gathered. "This video you captured," Agent Chen said, reviewing the footage on Maria's phone. "This is Dr. Blackwood himself performing the organ harvesting." "Yes, I'm absolutely certain," Maria replied. "I've seen him in the hospital countless times. That's definitely him, and the patient was Tommy Patterson, who had been admitted for appendix surgery." Agent Chen studied the video for several minutes, her expression becoming increasingly serious. "The evidence you provided is substantial," she finally said. "Video documentation of the crime in progress, medical records showing the pattern of suspicious deaths, and financial records that suggest an organized trafficking operation. "What happens now?" Maria asked. "We'll need to move carefully," Agent Chen explained. "If Dr. Blackwood suspects he's under investigation, he could destroy evidence and potentially flee the jurisdiction. We'll need you to go back to work as if nothing has happened while we set up surveillance and gather additional evidence." The request terrified Maria. Going back to work at Mercy General, pretending everything was normal while Dr. Blackwood continued his criminal operation, felt like putting herself and potentially other patients in danger. "What about my job? My family?" Maria asked. "When this comes out, they'll know I was the one who reported it. Dr. Blackwood has already threatened my employment. We'll make sure you and your children are protected," Agent Chen promised. "There are federal whistleblower protections that apply to your case, including financial compensation for losses related to your cooperation with this investigation." "How much financial compensation?" Maria asked, thinking about Elena's medical bills and their constant financial struggles. "That depends on the scope of the criminal operation and the amount of money recovered," Agent Chen explained. "But in cases involving millions of dollars in criminal proceeds, whistleblower settlements can be substantial, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars." The potential financial reward was enormous, more money than Maria could earn in a decade at her current salary. But more important than the money was the knowledge that her actions could prevent other families from experiencing the loss that Tommy Patterson's family would soon face. For 3 weeks, Maria continued working her night shifts while FBI agents conducted surveillance of Mercy General Hospital. The investigation expanded as federal agents discovered the scope of Dr. Blackwood's operation, revealing connections to other hospitals and medical facilities throughout the region. Agent Chen stayed in regular contact with Maria, providing updates on the investigation and coordinating her continued evidence gathering. Maria learned to document suspicious activities and patient transfers without arousing suspicion, using her phone to photograph medical records and noting unusual patterns in patient care. "We've identified at least 12 other victims over the past 2 years," Agent Chen reported during one of their clandestine meetings. "The operation is much larger than we initially suspected, involving multiple hospitals and a network of buyers from around the world. The investigation revealed that wealthy individuals from several countries were paying premium prices for organs harvested from young, healthy victims in American hospitals. The buyers were often terminally ill patients who couldn't wait for organs through legitimate transplant programs, or individuals seeking upgrades to healthier organs for longevity purposes. Dr. Blackwood's network included corrupt surgeons, anesthesiologists, and administrators at 3 different hospitals in the tri-state area. The conspiracy had been operating for over 5 years, generating more than $15 million in illegal profits that had been laundered through shell companies and offshore accounts. On a cold Tuesday morning in November, FBI agents executed coordinated raids on all 3 hospitals involved in the trafficking network. At Mercy General, agents arrived at 4 a.m. during the heart of the night shift, when the hospital was at its quietest and most vulnerable. Maria was making her rounds when she heard commotion near the administrative offices. Through the windows, she could see men in FBI jackets moving through the corridors with search warrants and evidence collection equipment. The timing wasn't coincidental. Acting on Maria's intelligence about Dr. Blackwood's usual schedule, agents had planned the raid for a night when he would be conducting another illegal organ harvesting procedure. They found him in the hidden operating room, preparing to harvest organs from a patient who had been admitted for routine hernia surgery just hours earlier. The patient, a 25-year-old graduate student named David Kim, was unconscious on the operating table with Dr. Blackwood standing over him holding surgical instruments. The preservation equipment was set up and ready, and Dr. Blackwood's business associate was present with the usual collection of organ transport containers. FBI. "Nobody move," Agent Chen shouted as the tactical team burst through the door. "Dr. Blackwood, step away from the patient immediately." The raid was swift and professional. Within minutes, David Kim was connected to proper life support and rushed to legitimate medical care, where doctors were able to stabilize his condition and reverse the effects of the unauthorized anesthesia. He survived the ordeal with no permanent physical damage, though the psychological trauma would take months of counseling to address. Dr. Blackwood was arrested on charges including murder, conspiracy, organ trafficking, money laundering, and racketeering. His business associate, identified as Marcus Webb, a broker who specialized in connecting organ buyers with illegal suppliers, was arrested on similar charges. The evidence collected during the raid was overwhelming. FBI agents discovered detailed records of the trafficking operation, including customer lists, financial transactions, and documentation of more than 30 organ harvesting procedures performed over 5 years. The scope of the criminal enterprise exceeded even the FBI's initial estimates. The arrests and subsequent investigation made national headlines, with news organizations describing the case as the largest medical fraud and organ trafficking scandal in American history. Dr. Richard Blackwood, once celebrated as a healthcare innovator, became the face of medical corruption and betrayal of patient trust. The trial lasted 8 months, with Maria serving as the key prosecution witness. Her testimony about witnessing the organ harvesting procedure and her subsequent investigation into the pattern of suspicious patient deaths proved crucial to securing convictions against the entire network. Dr. Blackwood maintained his innocence throughout the trial, claiming that he had been conducting legitimate medical research with proper consent and oversight. His defense attorneys argued that the prosecution was based on misunderstood medical procedures and that Maria Santos was a disgruntled employee seeking financial gain through false accusations. But the evidence was overwhelming. Maria's video footage clearly showed Dr. Blackwood harvesting organs from an unconscious patient without consent. Financial records revealed millions of dollars in payments from organ buyers around the world. Medical records documented the systematic murder of healthy young patients under the guise of routine surgical procedures. The prosecution presented testimony from families of victims who had trusted Dr. Blackwood with their loved ones' lives, only to have those lives stolen for profit. Tommy Patterson's mother Dorothy took the witness stand, describing how she had waited for days for news about her son's recovery, never knowing that he had been murdered hours after his surgery. "He was my only child," Dorothy testified through tears. "He was supposed to call me when he woke up from the appendix surgery. I sat in that hotel room for 3 days, waiting for a phone call that never came, because these people had killed my boy and stolen his organs for money." Dr. Richard Blackwood was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole on charges of murder, conspiracy, racketeering, and organ trafficking. Marcus Webb received a sentence of 35 years for his role in brokering organ sales and facilitating the trafficking network. 12 other medical professionals involved in the conspiracy received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years, depending on their level of involvement and cooperation with investigators. The scandal destroyed Mercy General Hospital's reputation and led to federal oversight of organ procurement procedures nationwide. The hospital filed for bankruptcy within 6 months of the arrests, unable to recover from the financial and reputational damage caused by the criminal enterprise that had operated within its walls. More than 300 families filed wrongful death lawsuits against the hospital and Dr. Blackwood's estate, seeking damages for the murders of their loved ones. The legal proceedings continued for years, ultimately resulting in settlements totaling more than $180 million paid to victims' families. But the personal cost for Maria Santos was enormous. Despite FBI protection and witness relocation assistance, her life was forever changed by her decision to expose the truth. She lost her job when Mercy General closed its night shift operations in the wake of the scandal. Death threats from associates of the trafficking network forced her to relocate her family to another state, leaving behind the community and support system she had built over 8 years. The stress of the investigation, trial, and media attention took a severe toll on her health and her children's emotional well-being. Elena's asthma worsened due to the stress of constant relocation and the fear that pervaded their lives. Miguel, who had been an outgoing child, became withdrawn and anxious, struggling with nightmares and behavioral problems at school. We had to change our names, move 3 times in 2 years, and live with the constant fear that someone connected to the trafficking network might try to hurt us. Maria reflected years later. My children paid a price for my decision to speak up, and that's something I'll always carry with me. The financial rewards from the federal whistleblower settlement provided security for Maria's family, but money couldn't restore the sense of safety and normalcy they had lost. The settlement, totaling $2.3 million over 10 years, ensured that Elena and Miguel could attend good schools and receive proper medical care, but it came at the cost of their childhood innocence and sense of security. Media attention was relentless during the trial and its aftermath. Maria found herself labeled both a hero and a target, praised by patient advocacy groups while receiving death threats from people who viewed her as a traitor who had destroyed a respected hospital and cost thousands of people their jobs. I received letters calling me a hero for exposing the truth, Maria recalled. But I also received letters calling me a murderer for destroying the hospital and putting people out of work. Some people blamed me for the hospital closing, instead of blaming Dr. Blackwood for running a criminal enterprise. The psychological toll was severe. Maria developed symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, including nightmares, anxiety attacks, and difficulty trusting medical professionals. She required years of counseling to process the trauma of witnessing murder and the subsequent upheaval of her life. I would wake up in the middle of the night, seeing Tommy Patterson on that operating table, she admitted during a television interview years later. I kept wondering if I could have saved him somehow, if I had acted faster or made different decisions. The guilt was overwhelming, even though I knew logically that I wasn't responsible for his death. 2 years after Dr. Blackwood's conviction, Maria Santos found herself in a new career that seemed perfectly suited to her experience and values. She worked as a patient advocate for a non-profit organization called Healthcare Justice Alliance, helping families navigate the complex medical system and identify potential signs of medical fraud or abuse. Her office was modest but comfortable, with walls covered by letters from families she had helped and awards from medical ethics organizations. The financial security provided by the whistleblower settlement had allowed her to choose meaningful work rather than simply pursuing the highest paying job she could find. "Do you ever regret speaking up?" asked Jennifer Walsh, a reporter from Medical Ethics Today magazine, during an interview commemorating the 2nd anniversary of Dr. Blackwood's conviction. Maria looked thoughtfully at a wall covered with photos of the 23 patients whose lives had been stolen for their organs. The faces looked back at her. Young people who would never see their families again, whose dreams had been cut short by greed and corruption disguised as medical care. "Those families deserve justice," she said quietly but firmly, "and future patients deserve protection." I couldn't live with myself knowing I had the power to stop it and chose silence instead. Every time I look at these photos, I remember that these were real people with real families who loved them. The Santos Protocol had been implemented in hospitals nationwide, requiring independent verification of all patient transfers and creating protected channels for healthcare workers to report suspicious activities without fear of retaliation. The protocol mandated that any patient transfer to an outside facility must be verified by at least 2 independent medical professionals, and that all organ donation procedures must be witnessed by representatives from state oversight agencies. The Santos Protocol has probably prevented dozens of similar crimes, explained Dr. Patricia Hendricks, director of the National Medical Ethics Board, during the same anniversary coverage. Maria Santos's courage in coming forward has made the entire healthcare system safer for patients and created a model for other healthcare workers who witness wrongdoing. The protocol also established federal funding for witness protection programs specifically designed to protect healthcare whistleblowers, recognizing that medical professionals who report criminal activity face unique risks and challenges. The program provided financial support, legal representation, and security services for healthcare workers who risked their careers and safety to protect patients. Elena and Miguel, now 12 and 9 years old respectively, had adapted to their new life with remarkable resilience. Elena's asthma was well controlled with proper medical care and reduced stress, and she had developed an interest in medicine that surprised and pleased her mother. Miguel had overcome his early behavioral problems and excelled in school, showing particular talent in mathematics and science. "My kids understand why we had to go through all of this," Maria explained. "They know that sometimes doing the right thing is hard and scary, but that it's still the right thing to do. I hope I've taught them that you can't stay silent when you see people being hurt, even if speaking up costs you something important." The children had received counseling and support services through the Witness Protection Program, helping them process the trauma and upheaval of their early years. They understood, in age-appropriate terms, that their mother had helped stop bad people from hurting patients, and that their temporary sacrifices had contributed to making hospitals safer for everyone. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had taken Dr. Blackwood's promotion offer instead of reporting what I saw," Maria reflected. "We would have been financially comfortable. Elena would have had better medical care immediately, and we wouldn't have had to go through years of fear and uncertainty. But Tommy Patterson would still be dead, and Dr. Blackwood would have continued murdering patients for profit. More families would have lost their loved ones, and I would have been complicit through my silence. I made the only choice I could live with." The interview concluded with Maria returning to her work, reviewing a case submitted by a family concerned about suspicious circumstances surrounding their father's death at a hospital in another state. Her experience had made her uniquely qualified to identify patterns of medical fraud and abuse, and her reputation as the nurse who brought down Dr. Blackwood's trafficking network gave credibility to her investigations. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one with the biggest office, the highest salary, or the most impressive credentials displayed on their wall. Sometimes it's the person with the moral courage to speak truth in the face of overwhelming power, even when that truth carries a terrible personal cost. Maria Santos proved that even a minimum wage night nurse, working alone in the quiet hours when most people sleep, can bring down a multi-million-dollar criminal empire when she chooses justice over comfort, truth over security, and other people's lives over her own convenience. Her story became required reading in nursing schools and medical ethics courses across the country, inspiring a new generation of healthcare professionals to understand that patient advocacy sometimes requires extraordinary courage. The Maria Santos Foundation, established with part of her whistleblower settlement, provides scholarships for nursing students and support for healthcare workers facing ethical dilemmas. Every patient deserves someone who will fight for them, Maria often tells nursing students during her speaking engagements. Sometimes that fight requires everything you have, but that's what we sign up for when we choose to work in healthcare. We're not just employees, we're guardians of the most vulnerable people in our society. The legacy of her courage extends far beyond the specific case of Dr. Blackwood's organ trafficking network. Her actions helped establish new standards for medical oversight, created protections for healthcare whistleblowers, and demonstrated that individual moral courage can triumph over institutional corruption. Years later, when asked what advice she would give to other healthcare workers who witness wrongdoing, Maria's answer was always the same. Trust your instincts, document everything, and remember that your first obligation is always to your patients, not to your employer. If you see something that could harm patients and you stay silent, you become part of the problem. What would you do if exposing corruption meant losing everything you'd worked for? When faced with the choice between financial security and moral courage, which path would you choose? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Like if this story inspired you to stand up for what's right. Subscribe for more medical ethics dramas and true crime healthcare stories. Comment on healthcare workers' responsibilities to patients versus employers. Share to help others learn about the importance of medical ethics and patient advocacy.